Every election cycle, power makes the same move. It doesn't start with policy, it starts with proximity. Power doesn't always ask for your vote first. Sometimes it asks for your face, your image, your cool, your silence. And when marginalized communities see one of our own elevated on a big stage in a major moment, we're told to read that as progress, as inclusion, as access. But tonight we're going to slow that down because visibility is not influence, and access without exchange is not power. This episode of Tea Leaves is not about accusing individuals. It's about reading systems. It's about understanding how culture is used during political moments, not to empower communities, but to stabilize power. The purpose of this Tea Leaves episode is simple but necessary: to explain the political logic behind cultural extraction, how black athletes and entertainers are elevated, courted, and showcased during election cycles without receiving policy concessions, economic guarantees, or structural protections in return. This is about how power borrows credibility from culture and why that borrowing is often mistaken for influence. And here's the thesis we're working from tonight. Visibility is what power offers when it has no intention of negotiating influence. When power wants legitimacy without accountability, it doesn't pass legislation. It platforms culture. So let's lay out the analytical spine clearly. This is how cultural extraction works. First, selection is intentional. Who is elevated, when they are elevated, and where they are placed is never random. Second, proximity creates expectations. Not expectations of advocacy, but expectations of neutrality, of restraint, of silence during moments when speech would carry weight. Third, the exchange is asymmetrical. The individual gains visibility, branding, and access. Power gains insulation, legitimacy, and cultural cover. The community gains nothing material. No policy shift, no economic investment, no protection, no redistribution. And that's the tale. Because if influence were real, something tangible would change. This conversation is not about telling anyone what they should believe. It's not about canceling or condemning success. And it's not about demanding that every black political figure become a political spokesperson. This is about asking a smarter question. Who benefits from this visibility and who pays the cost? Tonight we're going to read the tea leaves carefully. We're going to look at how athletic excellence gets politically neutralized, how cultural icons are repositioned during election cycles, and how visibility is repeatedly confused for leverage. We'll walk through specific high-profile examples, not to personalize the critique, but to expose the pattern. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Welcome to the PoliSports Tea Leaves, where we don't chase headlines, we read what's underneath them. I'm your host, Political Lil, and tonight we're breaking down why visibility is not influence and how cultural extraction operates in plain sight. Let's read the tea leaves. Before we name names, we need to name the mechanism, because too often we're trained to read visibility as endorsement, to see opportunity as leverage, and to confuse access with agency. But those things are not the same. So let's define the term that's doing the real work in this conversation. Cultural extraction. Cultural extraction is when power borrows the credibility, popularity, or cultural weight of marginalized people without transferring decision-making authority, policy influence, or economic control in return. It's not collaboration, it's not partnership, and it's definitely not empowerment. Here's where the confusion usually starts. When we see a black athlete or entertainer elevated, we're encouraged to interpret that moment emotionally. We're told, look how far we've come. Look who's in the room now. Look at the access. But access is not agency. Being invited into a room doesn't mean you get to rearrange the furniture. Sometimes it just means you're part of the decor. So let's get precise. Cultural extraction is not endorsement. You can be used symbolically without agreeing ideologically. Opportunity is not leverage. Leverage only exists when you can say no without punishment or yes with conditions. Access is not agency. Agency means you can influence outcomes, not just appearances. And when those three things are missing, visibility becomes a tool for power, not for the community. Here's the tea leaf most people miss. When marginalized figures are elevated without policy acts, power is not sharing control, it's harvesting legitimacy. Because legitimacy travels faster than legislation, and culture moves voters faster than policy ever could. That's why election cycles are prime time for cultural extraction. You don't need to change laws if you can change the vibe. You don't need to negotiate policy if you can project inclusion. So here's the question that we should sit with throughout this episode. When you see power smiling with culture, ask, what is power avoiding negotiating? Because power never gives visibility away for free. It's always covering for something. Now that we've set the table, now that we understand the mechanism, we can look at how this plays out in real time. Because once you recognize cultural extraction as a strategy, you start seeing it everywhere. Let's move to our first case study. Before we talk about what this means, we need to understand how this visibility was constructed, because visibility does not happen randomly. Let's slow this down for the people who don't live in draft politics. Shedeur Sanders didn't rise, he failed. He dropped deep into the draft, landed as a 5th round pick, and entered the league as a 3rd string quarterback. That's usually where media attention goes to die. But then something unusual happened. Despite starting only 8 games, Shedeur is selected to the Pro Bowl, a visibility platform typically reserved for franchise quarterbacks, not developmental backups. On draft night, President Trump publicly endorsed him. That's not about football, that's about symbolism. Shedeur is from Texas. Jasmine Crockett, one of Trump's most vocal political adversaries, is running for a Senate seat in the same state. Then the question isn't whether Shedeur supports Trump or Crockett. The question is, why this moment, this platform, this visibility, and who benefits from it? Before we go any further, let's be clear about the frame. This is not an accusation about Shedeur Sanders' personal beliefs. It's not a judgment about his character. And it's not a demand that he performs politics publicly. This is a structural reading about how elite athletic talent is managed when it becomes culturally valuable during an election cycle. Because the moment an athlete reaches a certain level of visibility, their excellence is no longer just athletic. It becomes political infrastructure. The first thing we have to understand is this. NFL visibility is curated, not organic. Draft narratives are shaped. Media access is controlled. League moments, who is spotlighted, when and how, are strategic. So when you see an athlete elevated across multiple high visibility moments, draft conversation, league showcase, Pro Bowl placement, that visibility is not accidental. It is selected. And selection always comes with conditions. Here's the second tea leaf. Political proximity doesn't create expectations of speed. It creates expectations of restraint. When an athlete is supported by Trump-aligned figures while simultaneously being elevated by league institutions, it produces something very specific, symbolic alignment without public risk. No endorsement is required. No statement is demanded. Because silence during an election cycle can be as politically useful as endorsement. Silence reassures sponsors. Silence stabilizes the brand. Silence keeps the draft narrative clean. This is where the favor economy comes in. In a favor-based system, the transaction is unspoken but understood. You don't speak out. You don't disrupt. You don't complicate the moment. And in return, you receive protection from controversy, brand stability, draft installation, a smoother transition into the league. But let's be clear about what you don't receive. You don't gain policy influence. You don't gain bargaining power for your community. You don't gain leverage over the system that's elevating you. What you gain is security, not control. This is how athletic excellence gets politically neutralized. The athlete becomes highly visible, widely celebrated, carefully contained. The league benefit, political power benefit, the athlete's brand benefit. But the public conversation never moves towards voter suppression, education equity, labor rights, economic redistribution, because that would require negotiation, not proximity. So here's the question that matters. If visibility equals influence, where is the public leverage and who benefits from the quiet? Because when silence is rewarded and speech is treated as risk, we're not looking at empowerment, we're looking at management. And this dynamic doesn't stop with male athletes. In fact, when we look at black women, especially those with cultural pull, the strategy gets even more refined. Let's talk about how that shows up next. When we talk about cultural extraction, we have to talk about black women differently, because black women don't just carry visibility, they carry meaning. Angel Reese's brand is not just athletic, it's generational. It resonates deeply with black women, with Gen Z, and with young people who understand confidence as self-definition, not defiance. That kind of influence is powerful, and power is always paying attention to it. Angel Reese didn't audition her way into Hollywood the traditional way. She was placed. Netflix, The Hunting Wives, is the ultra-conservative ideological series with a predominantly white female cast and a very specific political worldview. Angel is not entering as a seasoned actress, she's entering as a cultural symbol. She's being positioned alongside veteran actresses, not because of her acting range, but because of what she represents to a younger, more diverse audience. Then the extraction lens. Her presence softens the ideological space. It makes the message feel less threatening, less rigid, more relatable. This is what cultural extraction looks like in real time. Your identity used to make a system feel inclusive without you having power inside of it. So let's be clear about this part. Conservative adjacent platforms do not recruit accidentally. Access is granted strategically. Timing matters, context matters. This conversation is not about acting, it's not about talent, and it's not about whether Angel Reese deserves opportunity. She does. This is about where the opportunity comes from and how it's framed. Because platforms carry politics, even when they claim neutrality. Now here's the tea leaf most people miss. Cultural blending is safer than confrontation. Instead of demanding ideological alignment, power often chooses aesthetic proximity. It doesn't ask you to change who you are. It just places you in a space where your presence softens the room. That's the move. Angel Reese's visibility allows conservative culture to borrow her credibility without adopting her politics, her history, or her community's demand. No statements are required. No position needed to be clarified. The symbolism does the work. And here's why it worked. Her black urban base remains intact. Her authenticity isn't challenged. Her confidence isn't compromised. But her influence is recontextualized. She's no longer just a cultural disruptor. She becomes proof of inclusion. and inclusion without redistribution is a stabilizing force. The platform gains relevance, conservative culture gains insulation, the optics shift without policy movement, and Angel Reese gains visibility, opportunity, and expansion. None of this is accidental, and none of it is personal. It's strategic. So here's the question we have to ask ourselves. When opportunity asks for nothing in return, who is actually being paid? Because influence that doesn't move resources, policy, or protection is not leverage, it's absorption. And this strategy isn't just for rising stars. It also deploys through legacy icons, figures whose cultural capital has already been earned. Let's look at how this plays out next. Now let's start here. When power wants to clean its image, it doesn't argue policy. It borrows nostalgia. And there are few cultural figures with more cross-generational credibility than Snoop Dogg. Snoop isn't just an entertainer, he's a memory, he's a mood, he's a cultural shortcut to familiarity. And that's exactly why legacy icons matter in political moments. Snoop Dogg is not just a rapper, he's a global black cultural translator. He's trusted, familiar, non-threatening. The Winter Olympics are a global stage where the U.S. is judged not on sport, but on values, optics, and legitimacy. By appointing Snoop as a U.S. ambassador, power gets to borrow black cool, black credibility, and black cultural warmth without addressing black political grievances at home. He becomes the face that says, "We're fine," while policy says otherwise. The Olympics aren't just sport, they're national branding on a world stage. Who gets visibility there matters. So when a figure like Snoop is elevated in that space, it signals something larger than personal success. It says, this is safe, this is normalized, this is representative. Not because of politics, but because of cool. Now this evolution is often framed as branding, reinvention, longevity. And that's true but incomplete. Branding doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens inside relationships, inside favors, inside forgiveness economy. Because here's the tea leaf. Public contradictions are quietly forgiven when favors are owed. At one point, Snoop publicly condemned black artists who performed during Trump's first inauguration. Later, he himself appeared at a Trump-adjacent inaugural activity. That shift isn't about hypocrisy, it's about favor-based politics. In a favor economy, memory is flexible. Past statements dissolve when future usefulness increases. And power doesn't require ideological consistency from its cultural ambassador. It only requires normalization. This is the part we can't ignore. Power does not need Snoop's politics. It doesn't need his endorsement. It doesn't need his belief. It needs his cool. Because cool disarms skepticism. Cool short-circuits critique. Cool makes people stop asking hard questions. And nostalgia is a political anesthetic. It relaxes the audience while the system stays the same. So what's the exchange here? Snoop builds his brand, he expands his global reach, he secures legacy positioning. Power secures cultural installation. It looks familiar, it looks relaxed, it looks unthreatening. And again, no policy concessions, no economic redistribution, no structural accountability, just vibe. These three stories are not identical, but they rhyme. In each case, visibility is granted at a politically useful moment. In each case, the individual gains access, but power retains control. This is happening during an election cycle where traditional coalitions are weakening, protest energy is low, and black political science is being interpreted as availability. We're not saying these individuals are co-signing conservative ideology. We're saying power is placing them where their visibility does political work, whether they intend it or not. Tea leaves don't predict the future, they reveal intent. And the intent here is clear. When power feels unstable, it borrows culture to steady itself. So remember this, power doesn't care if you change, it cares if you normalize. Because once something feels normal, it stops being questioned. And when you step back and you look at all of this together, the rising star, the cultural disruptor, the legacy icon, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. So let's bring this home. When you put all of this together, the rising athlete, the cultural disruptor, and the legacy icon, one question keeps surfacing. Not who's visible, not who's invited, but who is actually being paid and who isn't. Because visibility without outcome is not progress, it's maintenance. Visibility without outcomes is not progress, it's maintenance. Let's be honest about what's missing in every example we've discussed tonight. There are no policy concessions, no commitments to voting rights, education equity, or labor protections. There are no economic guarantees, no investment pipelines, no ownership stakes, no redistribution tied to the visibility that's being leveraged. And there are no structural commitments to the Black community, no long-term obligations, no accountability mechanisms. Just moments, just access, and just optics. Here's the tea leaf that connects everything. Culture icons are being used as risk shields, not negotiated. Their presence absorbs critique, their visibility dampens scrutiny, their proximity reassures audiences that nothing is that wrong. Visibility isn't being used to invite reform, it's being deployed to delay it. And this is the most dangerous part. Marginalized groups are treated as symbolic capital, not political stakeholders. Our culture is valuable, our stories are marketable, our faces are useful. But our demands, our protections, our material conditions, those are considered inconvenient. So we're celebrated but not consulted, shown but not heard, centered in imagery but excluded from outcomes. This is the hard truth Tea Leaves is asking us to sit with. If visibility were influence, something would have changed by now. If access were power, policy would reflect it. If opportunity were leverage, there would be an exchange. But instead, what we see is repetition, different faces, same structure. So here's the question I want to leave you with tonight. If all this visibility produces no policy, no protection, no redistribution, what exactly are we celebrating? Because celebration without accountability is just applause for the system. And that's why reading the tea leaves matter. Visibility is not influence, access is not power, and opportunity without exchange is extraction. If nothing is being negotiated, no policy, no protection, no redistribution, then nothing is being given. So read the tea leaves carefully, because power always tells you what it's doing, if you know how to look. This is Controlling Interest, PoliSports Tea Leaves. I'm Political Lil. Until next time, stay observant, stay grounded, and don't confuse being seen with being heard.